Good evening. This is Goldie. It's Wednesday, July 7th, 2010. Thanks for tuning in. Please become a follower on Ustream. I'm going to have a website at some point that's going to have all of these recordings. Keep sending me the questions, the emails, and messages. I appreciate them all, especially the criticism. I want to say, I was watching Fox yesterday, again, too much time, but I am an elitist. I went to college. I went to law school. I grew up reading the New York Times, and I do talk down to people. I don't do it on purpose, but that's what I do. I don't have enough time left in my life to do anything else. At this point in the election cycle, a few months left to go, pretty much all you hear on the radio or see on TV or the internet is pure election message. I put that in quotation marks because we've been talking about the word message. Now we're going to talk about something called election message. There's not much significance in it except the fact that that's what we're seeing from everybody. There's not much we can do at this point as far as fixing some of the structural problems that I've been talking about over the last few weeks, excluding, of course, getting a candidate to agree to bring forward a few constitutional amendments, thereby shooting him or herself in the foot. Let's go ahead and list them again. Constitutional amendment for term limits for congressmen and senators. An iteration, number two, an iteration that an entity is not a person entitled to free speech rights. See the Citizens United Supreme Court case. Number three, only individual humans can donate to political campaigns and drastically limit those donation amounts. And number four, no revolving door for employment from government employment to any entity, and that would mean any union, corporation, affiliation, individual, or group that lobbies enter any governmental agency for a period of 10 years following that employment. I believe there are structural problems that cannot be solved without a constitutional amendment for these items. There's too many entrenched interests, and we would then be able to overrule the majorities in Congress and some of the nonsensical Supreme Court decisions that have come out of the Roberts Supreme Court. I'll expand on that later in my privatization section. And I just want to go through just those amendments very quickly. Term limits for congressmen and senators. Everybody agrees that these guys are incompetent, and so I'd rather have newbie incompetence up there than these entrenched incumbents. The idea that an entity is not a person entitled to free speech rights under the Citizens United Supreme Court case, as I stated over and over again, Exxon is now able to spend as much money as they want to on an election advertising for any senator or congressman, etc. A constitutional amendment in order to make it that only individual humans can donate to political campaigns, and we would limit those donation amounts, and that would give those of us kind of an equal footing as far as having an ability to get in and talk and lobby, etc. And the fourth thing, which is one of the most important things, is no revolving door for employment from governmental employment to any entity. So in other words, those people in the Minerals and Management Service that worked with BP on getting those permits done would not be able to go to work for BP for 10 years. So in any event, that's kind of an explanation of those particular items. We're going to go ahead and go through the current messaging because you can't get away from it right now, so let's go ahead and talk about it for fun. I will reiterate that my friends and potential debating partners should really not say that Fox is fair and balanced, just because Fox has a slogan of fair and balanced. I don't say Jon Stewart or Keith Olbermann or MSNBC are fair and balanced, so please stay intelligent and don't use Fox's message, and don't use their slogan. Slogan doesn't make it so. Let's go through a couple of things. Early in yesterday's O'Reilly factor, he was talking about the Michael Steele gaffe that we can't win in Afghanistan and this is Obama's war. That's what Michael Steele had said. O'Reilly asked John Stossel, supposedly a libertarian, whatever that means, as we know those words don't mean anything except what we define them as. He said, do you believe, this is O'Reilly to Stossel, because Stossel was saying maybe we shouldn't be in Afghanistan. He said, do you believe in Sarah Palin's argument that we need to take the fight to the terrorists over there? We were just talking about Michael Steele's gaffe, And O'Reilly went ahead and said that here is Sarah Palin's argument. A governor who couldn't finish her term, who didn't say what she knew how to read. Okay, do I really need to comment on his Palin message for 2012? Okay, people have said, is he a shill? Is he not a shill? Well, it was completely nonsensical to bring up Sarah Palin's message to take the fight to the terrorists over there. That was actually said by George Bush. And is this the method of an entertainer? Remember, O'Reilly's an entertainer. And his main thing he says at the end is, where the spin stops here. Again, it's a slogan. Don't believe it because he says it. Look at what he says. Later on, Sean Hannity commented on Levi Johnston, the ex-son-in-law of Sarah Palin. It was real big news on the #1 cable news network. And look at all the messages in that statement. Levi apparently had publicly apologized for some of the things he said about the Palin family. You may remember that when he first made the disparaging comments about Sarah Palin in particular, the Fox bandwagon was all over the lies that he was spewing. However, I guess he's no longer lying when he apologized. Hannity and a panel member, a Republican strategist, can't remember her name from last night, they accepted the apology as though they have some right to do so. We got to watch that. Pull up Hannity's last night. Just watch them do that. Sean then, he asked the panel if Sarah Palin was going to run, and if she ran, would she get the nomination? So Sean used the Levi Johnston apology to show his support for Sarah Palin. Again, it's a nonsensical transition, and I mean, it was just a way for them to get to talk about Sarah Palin. Again, we're just talking about message here, okay? I'm not coming up with any structural problems. Later on in the next show, Greta Van Susteren, she also talked about the Levi Johnston apology. So I guess all three shows, they use separate producers and an editorial staff. And I guess there's no overseer at Fox that said it was okay to run these pro-Palin stories. By the way, no mention of the apology appeared in today's Austin American-Statesman. I guess it was big news somewhere, you know, maybe, it was big news on Fox. It wasn't big news in the country. But in any event, please don't say that Fox is fair and balanced. They're either pushing Sarah Palin, or all three commentators coincidentally like Sarah Palin. And it is not a policy of Fox to like her. It's only one of those two things, because it must be coincidence that all three in a row were talking about getting Sarah Palin on there into their shows. Now, Rush Limbaugh, God bless him, I love the guy. He's great. He's got like 20 million listeners, $300 million contract. His message is just as egregious. Yesterday, during Rush's daily attack on the Democratic Party through his attack on Obama, he intimated that he would do a better job of leading the Republican Party than Michael Steele. He kind of went, heh, heh. It was kind of like a George Bush imitation by Jon Stewart, if you've ever seen that. So again, is Rush a shill for the Republican Party? He certainly tries to give them advice. He says he could do a better job of leading the Republican Party. I guess it was facetious, is what he would claim later. The rest of his talking in that little section involved everything that Obama has ever wanted and pushed. Health care, higher taxes, which is what I guess Obama wants to do, soak the rich, etc. All under the word socialism. Now, when you listen to Rush, he is in pure election message mode. Pure election message, okay? Now let's do a little bit of the BP oil gusher messaging. Again, messaging. Sean Hannity stated that Obama was in the pocket of big oil. And he goes, I hate to say that phrase. like I guess pocket of big oil is something he would normally reserve to defend Republicans against. And he brought up the story that's been floating around the Fox anyway, that Obama fought a ban on drilling in the Gulf. So he fought that ban. It was a year ago or so. And this was before that Obama had promoted the increased drilling offshore, which happened a few months before BP, before the BP oil gusher, as we're calling it. As I said in BP oil spill, sorry, that's the title, number 1 or number 2, the Republican machine, the message machine, will say that Obama caused the spill. Now, this was not true right after the spill, right after the gusher, but it is now. And they certainly were saying that he failed to contain the gusher. Obama declined all the help that was offered from all over the world. Everybody was offering to help, and Obama was saying, no, 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 you don't have unions working on it. He failed to get the offered skimmers to help with the cleanup. I saw that they did accept the help of Kevin Costner. They are going to continue that message that Obama caused the spill, the gusher. And as soon as they drill that second well and do cap this thing, you're not going to hear any more about it. You're not going to hear any more. It's not going to be any different. The message is going to be the same. Obama caused it. Regulations caused it. Bad regulations caused it. We shouldn't have regulations. And Obama caused the problems on the beaches and the estuaries and all of the rest of the damages that were caused. The interesting thing about this statement is that it's actually true if you listen to my prior rants, but it's not for their political message reasons. It's due to those deficiencies in the system, the inability of regulators to properly regulate the regulated people, and the ability to get a job when you come out, et cetera, unlimited campaign contributions, et cetera. Okay, now let's look at some of Obama's messaging. I know I'm doing a lot of messaging tonight. Sorry about that. Obama's focus right now is on an issue that cannot be dealt with prior to the election, and it is a pure election message, and it's the immigration issue. Look for him to continue to say, he's going to continue to say this, that security of the border is his utmost priority. Remember in his election in 2008, he was talking about national security was his utmost priority. But that we must deal with the people who are already here. So he'll give that a little bit of lip service as well. And the interesting thing here is his message is actually correct, pursuant to my immigration rants 1 and 2, but it's coming from him at exactly the wrong time to do anything about it. Nothing is going to be passed this year before the election about immigration. Now, continuing the big election message on Fox this past Monday. On Monday, they were talking about, they had a sheriff on whose life has been threatened. And he said that the Mexican mafia have issued a green light to kill this Arizona sheriff. What they're doing here is they're connecting the drug war, Mexican mafia, and immigration law, just as Governor of Arizona Jan Brewer did a couple of weeks ago, at least on Hannity. This was on 6/28/10, so June 28, 2010. Hannity followed the Jan Brewer connection of these things with a story on that illegal immigrants are smuggling drugs across the Arizona border. So they're doing a message connection of drugs and illegal immigration. Scary, scary, look out, whoa. And they were talking about the big shootout south of the border last week, you know, where some bullets actually came into the U.S. And when they're talking about it, they show the videos of people scaling the fences while they talked about the drug smuggling problem. So they show the same exact videos of people climbing the fences when they're talking about illegal immigration as when they talk about the drug smuggling problem. So when you see that, when you hear that message, when the drug war is connected with illegal immigration, you know what you're getting. Pure message, pure election message. Got to be scared. Only Republicans can take care of it. Now, at the bottom of the page, when they were talking about this was on Monday, about the Arizona sheriff, it says, Arizona sheriff on death threats over immigration law. So the big blurb at the bottom says Arizona sheriff on death threats over immigration law. They're explaining who's talking. That's the message at the bottom of the screen. These guys are great. I mean, they're better. I am really surprised they lost in 08. I kid you not. In any event, you're not going to be hearing anything other than election message until the election on this issue. It's now in court. The feds have filed suit against the Arizona law. It's going to take a while to litigate it. They may get denied their injunction, but the actual hearing on the merits is going to take a long time. So what the Fox message, Republican message was, the waiting game was, is Obama going to file the lawsuit? That's over. The waiting game's over. So now you've got McCain and Kyle, senators from Arizona, talking about how this was premature to file this lawsuit, which, by the way, means they don't have much, if that's your argument. I mean, if Arizona had passed a pro-slavery law, would we wait until they actually had slaves to file suit? I'm not equating the two. I'm just asking the question, Mr. McCain. All right. Nothing structural is going to be dealt with because everybody's running for re-election and just wants to yell really, really loudly or loud and do absolutely nothing. Nobody wants to do anything. They want to rest on their existing laurels that they have. Another message, election message, last night on Hannity. Our headline tonight, Obama's depression. Hannity talked about how Obama's had 16 months to fix it, and everything he's done has failed. Stuart Varney and Dana Perino were the guests. Dana, as you remember, was press secretary for Bush. She's pretty smart. Stuart says that unless we turn things around in 119 days, which is the election, and I guess what he means is electing more Republicans, we will have a 50-50 chance in the next 10 years of a 1930s-style depression. Scared Dana Perino. Hannity agreed, but he said it's going to be much quicker than 10 years. And I'm not trying to scare people. Well, that's exactly what they're doing. So again, I'm just trying to point out to you messages. Somebody comes up with an argument like this, it's all message. And in fact, anything you hear over the next 118 days is pure message. The sky is falling, which it might be, by the way. Okay, we were going to talk about the economic collapse in a future rant. However, their message is throw out the Democrats and Obama. And by the way, remember, he's a socialist, not really a Democrat. Please, let's not be more of the idiots spouting these messages without actual solutions. I would just recommend staying away from anybody who's running for office, Fox News, and MSNBC until after the election. Jon Stewart, yeah, you know, I don't know what to tell you there. He's pretty funny. He is pro-Obama, so, you know, maybe you're supposed to stay away from him, but he does make me laugh and cry. Okay, I want to go to our actual issue of the day, our actual structural issue, and it's a continuation of, or an expansion of what the word commons means. So I'm going to start with the message word that I heard last night, privatization. And when I put these things together, I have an idea about what I'm going to do, and this morning when I was walking up the hill, stuff started coming into my head, and I felt that the word privatization is another word that it's a message word, and it's devoid of any meaning except as a propaganda tool. And you hear it from Republicans, we should just privatize everything because the federal government can't do anything. Let's talk about the idea of the commons. Again, a reiteration quickly. As you may know from my past rants, the BP oil gusher allows us to look at how our government protects or doesn't protect, handles, regulates, and grants treasure from the commons. And the commons is at least as we agree, air, land, and water. So there are certain items, and the items that are owned by everybody, but not owned by anybody individually. These are certain items that the government doles out to individual companies. And this is privatization items, which I am going to also call the commons. And we, the people, own these items. So, for example, the idea of an oil lease is really a privatization of the ability to drill on federal land, on commons property, or on our offshore land. It's also, in a permit system, the ability to pollute more into the air and water, or to pollute in any amount, okay? Now, the items that we want to privatize are by definition owned by the government, or they are functions handled by the government. And they are a commons, because it's something that we own, all of us, and are doled out by the government, and we need to protect. These items need protection from entrenched interests, both in and out of the government. During Bush's 2 terms, and the huge Republican majorities that existed, privatization in Texas was all the rage. And the concept was, and remains, simple. Government cannot run anything correctly. So let's privatize the function, pick the function. In Texas, one of the famous privatizations was the state Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP, C-H-I-P. Republican majorities paid for by big corporations were drooling over the various contracts that they could get to be the winning bidder to handle the CHIP. For CHIP, a big vendor did get the contract. The state workers that handled the program were transferred or fired, and incentives were placed in the contract for the vendor saving money for the state. Yeah. The vendor immediately offshored the bulk of the call center jobs. And this made it extremely difficult for users to navigate the system. In fact, they had huge problems at the beginning for anybody getting through to anybody to sign up for CHIP. And they made everybody re-sign up. You had to sign up again. Many children were thrown off the rolls of CHIP. Yay, great. Guess that's what we wanted. However, lo and behold, we did not save any money, and eventually the state terminated the contract. They were hugely over budget. And again, I don't know why they didn't have it in the contract that it was a fixed bid contract. In the development community, when we hire a contractor, we usually try and make it a fixed bid contract except for change orders. So a change order is not for the bulk of the work that's going to be done. So it seems that when you privatize a function that's an item of the commons, okay, or an interest of importance to the government, for the privatization to be truly effective, the state of Texas would have had to oversee all of the transactions of the vendor to make sure that our interest in insuring uninsured children was being fulfilled. Think about that for a second. So we're hiring these guys to make it more efficient, but then when you start getting these 10,000 complaints that I'm off of CHIP and I was on it and I qualify, if these guys are trying to make money and profits, then we would have to oversee it in order to make sure that their profit interest doesn't override insuring the uninsured children. Our interest was not in the vendor making higher profits, although for the legislators maybe it was. I'm not going to put that upon them. I mean, if you think about it, there would be no savings at all. In fact, if we were to do it the way once you send it out to a private vendor and then have to oversee it, it's going to probably take as many people in the state government as you had. And so you'll have another layer of management and supervision of the vendor to keep a watch out for the profit-making disincentives. Let's go ahead and pick a simpler example, okay? Because that's not an easy example to think about. Tollways. And please keep in the back of your mind the healthcare situation that I brought up last week, with the incentives for companies to not pay claims in order to make more money. So again, let's talk about tollways. As we continue to build more tollways, which, by the way, a tollway is a privatization in itself, we have to give the constructor and operator of the tollway the ability to mortgage the property under the tollway in order for them to get secured financing on the tollway. So when somebody wants to build a building, they buy the land, and in the transaction to buy the land, they borrow money to construct it. This is just a simple construction project. They go borrow the money. The lender takes an interest, a secured interest, a mortgage on the property. And if you don't make your payments, they foreclose. That's how it works. It's a pretty good system. Works pretty well, barring this economic collapse and the sale of these loans and the insurance of these loans by AAG. But in any event, so when we talk about the property under the tollway, in order to get the financing to build the tollway, okay, they're going to guarantee it with the income stream from the tollway over the next whatever the life of the lease is or the agreement. Think for a second what happens when somebody defaults on that secured loan. As we said before, the lender forecloses. Now, I'm not opposed to user fees, so tollways per se, I am not opposed to. This gets the people using the item to pay for it. But I am against user fees going to a private for-profit company regarding the commons, which in this case is transportation. So we are trying to move people around. They said we can get these roads built more efficiently by giving it to this company. Now, I'll get back to this in a second, but yesterday on Hannity, his all-American panel, quotation marks, they stated that we should just let the states default on their obligations versus giving them more stimulus money to balance their budgets. So if, let's say, Dallas-Fort Worth decides to privatize the airport, or the state of Texas decides to sell the Capitol building and sells it off for a one-time giant fee, the buyer might be an American corporation. However, the lender could easily be a foreign government like China, or the buyer could be China. So if the airport loan or the Capitol building loan or the tollway loan goes into default, then we could have a foreign government owning the item in question. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad. During the 80s, the Japanese bought a lot of office buildings in the US. And then when their economy collapsed, they lost them again. Now, how about a national park or the Grand Canyon, for example? Both classic commons. Are we willing to risk a limitation of access or access fees so high that only the rich can afford them? Remember, this is not a question of foreign ownership. It could be Chase or Citibank restricting the access to the commons. Now let's go back to the tollway. For some people in northeastern Travis County, the tollway is the only easy way to get into downtown, and it was touted as a congestion reliever. This is State Highway 130. People stupidly bought houses out there thinking that this would stay a cheap tollway. So upon a default of the tollway loan, the government's interest in that tollway relieving congestion, so the purpose was to relieve congestion and move people around, that interest could be thwarted by the lender and the new owner. They could shut it down. It might be cheaper to just shut down the thing until they find a new buyer for the tollway. Now, as an aside, the tollway contract that they have prohibits the state of Texas from upgrading existing roads within a certain distance of the tollway. And in this case, I-35 through downtown Austin cannot be upgraded under that contract. Think about that. So we all are worried about how bad I-35 is through downtown, and we are unable, contractually limited, to upgrading it because of the State Highway 130 tollway. Now, the big argument that you hear about privatization, positive argument, is that private industry can do it better. Do it better. And that's a statement that absolutely has no meaning. when we privatize, we need to look at the people's interest in the commons that is being privatized. And there are certain things, once we look at the people's interest, or the taxpayer's interest, that cannot be privatized effectively. So that chip program is certainly one of them. Where the jury's out on the tollway, okay? But do you really want country of China owning the Grand Canyon? A lot of states are selling a lot of things, okay? Now, going to the message on Fox, so this is a slight digression. The message on Fox that Obama wants to nationalize all industries, which is the opposite of privatization, nationalization, bringing it into the fold of a commons. The auto industry is a great example. Even though as a part of the rescue package that became the nationalization of GM and Chrysler, they were effectively nationalized. I mean, look at the percentage of ownership owned by the government, and the government backing the loans and bonds issued by these companies. So definitely, we own GM and Chrysler. Now, at that time, I was opposed to helping these automakers, although in the long run, the argument was maybe it was more efficient than sending more unemployment benefits to Michigan, following the closure of all the plants that would have happened, maybe. I see the merit of that argument, but if anybody was watching TV from November 08 through March of 09, it's a different world than what is talked about in hindsight. Excuse me. In World War II, we did have a national interest, and we needed these companies to build tanks, jeeps, and airplanes for the war effort. And we definitely had a national interest in these businesses staying in business, these companies. Maybe that's a compelling national interest now as far as the auto companies go. I don't really think so. So if we compare a tollway, all right, with an automaker, so if we actually are trying to look at privatization by doing a comparison of the two, we find very different interests. And it appears that the automaker example does not involve the commons, where the tollway does. Okay? So in typing this thing up and thinking about this issue of privatization, and when I thought about privatization of some companies and privatization of other items or companies, it looks like we now have a method of looking at a privatization or a proposed privatization and can probably intuitively, as Mr. Anecdote, which is what I am, we can probably tell whether or not a private company should be involved at all in the ownership of that item or the administration of that item. Looks like, to me, in the case of the tollway, no. But in the case of the automaker, yeah. Let's get that stuff off the books. Because in the case of the automaker, there's no national interest in ownership of the company. Except, of course, for the weak argument that was cheaper stimulus money, which in the long run with the loan guarantees will probably be proven wrong, okay? That's my opinion. So, in addition to our examination of the commons and the structural deficiencies mentioned at the beginning of the show that require constitutional amendments, it seems that we can add something to the list, and that is privatization as a structural deficiency in our system, at least the method of privatization as used now, which is extremely similar to the system of regulation that we have. The people that call for it, they're lobbying with unlimited funds. They're lobbying both the elected officials, and they're also using the famous wink, wink, nod, nod of promising a job to the, say the Texas Department of Transportation state worker who supports a tollway built and operated by a private entity. Now, a far uglier example, and one that's a lot quieter, is the operation of prisons in Texas, which here has led to less oversight and a push by the vendors of these private prisons to build more prisons. Or at least there was a big push in the mid-2000s. It doesn't take a genius to see how the number of prisoners will not and did not drop, but would increase to fill those beds. And also there would be lobbying against the relaxation of any non-violent drug and other low-harm criminal laws. And now it certainly appears that that's what happened to the medicinal marijuana and decrim propositions in the mid-2000s. I've always said that the drug war issue was a big drug companies, Paxil, Xanax, et cetera, against it. But there were actually private prison concerns that don't want any lessening of the number of people arrested and put in jail. Now think about that, capital C conservatives, or you little c conservatives that are Republicans. Is that really what you want as a taxpayer? And for the rest of you people that are listening, or Democrats, or whatever you are, or whatever the heck I am, because I'm neither Democrat or Republican, not a libertarian, I don't know what I am. I'm goldy. But that's not what I want. Now let's talk a bit more about the structural problems of vendors pushing a policy to a governmental entity. I spoke of this in terms of surveillance cameras in my surveillance camera rant. Although I was not talking about the red light cameras. I was talking about a public safety camera. I was calling it a surveillance camera that they were putting at 12th and Chicon Street in Austin on the east side. There's a July 6, 2010 article in the Austin American Statesman entitled, "Critics Try to Put Brakes on Red Light Cameras." And this article shows the structural problem of allowing a vendor to push a policy. Okay? So the vendor who was selling the cameras, they were the ones that were pushing the red light policy. Let's get red light cameras, okay? Remember, they might be able to give a revolving door job to the people they lobby or sell to. They can give as much as they want to campaigns, etc. Okay? The red light cameras in Texas have shown a drop in deaths and accidents at intersections where the cameras have been installed. It's true. They definitely have good statistics on that. I know I stop. Now, I am of course opposed to the cameras due to the dangers of them being pointed in the wrong direction, which if you drive along, there's a lot of times you see these cameras pointed somewhere. Who knows where they're pointed, into bathrooms, etc. So I would recommend that you pull up my surveillance ramp, which is the exact same dangers of those red light cameras. In any event, I know that it does save some lives and it saves some accidents. So even though there are less people running the red lights, I feel that there's a fundamental right that should not be tread upon by these cameras. Now, again, I'm going to the structural deficiency of allowing a vendor to pick the policy. Now, let's look at this situation. Not only did our elected reps give away a fundamental right of privacy in these red light cameras, they did so in such a way where we're not making any money. That's the point of this article. Some cities are stopping doing them because they were supposed to be making money on it. Didn't take a cop car, had a camera, you'd mail out a ticket, it wasn't criminal, it was civil, so there wasn't a due process issue, it went against the car, not the person. I can tell you this, the contracts that were negotiated by these vendors was they only leased you the cameras, and then they split the price of how much you made. Now the vendors are making plenty of money, cities are not. Now this is the exact same structural problem of allowing the regulated to draft the regulations that are over the activities that they do. And you can see my last 4 BP oil rants. The policy was pushed by the people who are going to make money from the item in question. And as with a lot of elected officials, it's easy to give away someone else's money and treasure. So there's that structural problem again. That structural problem of regulations. And who's writing the regulations? Who's writing the new red light camera law? It's not the taxpayers. All right, further digression. Last week I talked about the Chicago gun case. On yesterday's O'Reilly, Charles Krauthammer, I don't know what he is. He's certainly not a capital C conservative. He's a neocon, really. And O'Reilly, both these guys, they were arguing that the Second Amendment is a fundamental right. I was cheering, like the Miranda warnings. Seriously, I was yelling at the TV. This is exactly as I stated in last week's Second Amendment rant. I felt that the negligible decrease in crime and statistically 0% increase in convictions I'm sorry. That was when I was referring back to the fundamental right of what was being tread on with the crime by the cameras. So in other words, while we would have a negligible decrease in crime and a statistically 0% increase in convictions due to the police cameras, they were completely outweighed by the danger to our right of privacy and inability of these agencies to keep the data private. Now, when we talked about, and so that wasn't in last week's Second Amendment rant, but I did say that in the Second Amendment rant, it was an important, the Second Amendment is an important fundamental right. And I felt that in order to be true to these fundamental rights, you got to support the Second Amendment. Now, these small c conservatives, so I was using the same argument as to the cameras. There is some help, but it's outweighed by the treading on my privacy. So these small c conservatives, O'Reilly and his ilk, are arguing the importance of fundamental rights. May be happy, okay? Now keep this argument in your pocket when they say racial profiling, anyone who's brown at an airport's okay, or that the racial profiling prohibition in the Arizona immigration law will keep those fundamental civil rights from being trampled. Or when they say it's okay to give up some privacy with cameras. Fundamental right. Fundamental right. Extremely important. So I'm kind of dealing with message here as well as what is a very specific item that capital C conservatives should care about. So we're coming up with a good definition of what a capital C conservative. It's not a Republican, by the way. Now, the thing they said that fundamental rights are just that, fundamental. So keep that in your mind. And before we allow government to trample on them, as in the case of guns, they've got, whereas in the cameras, we don't have any statistical evidence that the cameras help anything. In the case of guns, there's I can't remember what the number was. Maybe I heard 12,000 or 60,000 deaths and injuries last year in the United States. That's a big number. However, we must stay pure to the Constitution, and that's what these guys are saying. So we want to keep this one in mind when we're hearing about cameras coming out or racial profiling being okay before we get it on an airplane, or that it's okay to pull over somebody that's brown. Now, you are hearing arguments that the Obama administration did not bring up a 14th Amendment argument regarding the racial profiling activities in the Arizona law. The problem is the federal law has the same problem. People are allowed to be stopped with probable cause. So there are other issues. I'm going to look into it some more, but there are other issues, although you are hearing the spewage of, well, if racial profiling was going to be a big problem, how come it's not in the lawsuit? The ACLU has filed a lawsuit. There's 4 others filed besides the ACLU as to the racial profiling issues. But they may, although I doubt it out of the Roberts Court, you never know what those guys are going to do, by the way. You may hear them opine on the racial profiling issue. Now, one of my problems, so I don't say I'm right on all this stuff, and as I think deeper and deeper into this stuff, we have to bring up one of the problems of the theory of protecting the commons. So let's say we would pass all those constitutional amendments that I've asked for, and that it starts working, and we get extremely clean oil well drilling, and we have all these skimmers ready to go, and they drill relief wells, and they have 4 blowout preventers instead of 1. Now here's a problem that we have in our system that we have in the world, and I'm not calling for changing it at all. But it's the effect on the commons by entities like China, over which we have no control. So hopefully, when we've talked about the commons and protecting our commons, we now have to start always keeping in our mind things over which we don't have any control. So for example, when the Clean Air Act was passed, there were cities in Connecticut that were going to become non-compliant or non-attainment because New York City pollution would be measured at the time when the southwest breeze drifted it over Greenwich. And they didn't have any control over that. So now we hear a reasonable argument, and it's that we must continue to keep coal energy cheap. All right? It's a reasonable argument. It's true. If we're going to produce goods, our cost of electricity has to be lower. For example, in order to compete against China. So if we're going to produce the same good as China, we have to have the same cheap energy as China. I mean, if we're going to try and do that. Now, Governor Rick Perry is your future president, by the way, is big on this argument. Big, big, big. We don't want any regulations. We don't want the EPA coming in here and preempting our state non-restrictions on pollution. Believe me, that's what the state of Texas is going through right now. Now, think about this. Realistically, that cheap item in Walmart, it's never going to be produced in the United States again. It's going to be produced in China. And when China raises its standard of living enough, it's not going to be even produced in China. Okay? So the question is, how do we protect the air over which we have no control? This is a hard question. Okay? And it's why we try to draft and enforce international agreements. But we know what their interest is. They don't want to do it. They're building a coal plant every two weeks, I think is what it said. Remember in a prior rant, I talked about how all of the costs of something are never included? So we've got a bunch of free stuff. The commons, health. It's all free. It's not connected. The healthcare costs of uncontrolled pollution are going to be extravagant. So while, we're seeing, and I brought up an article 2 weeks ago, New York Times, where they were talking about the cost of unclean coal plants was $120 billion a year, the health costs, but that the cost of actually putting the scrubbers on would be $2.8 billion a year. All right, but that cost, that $120 billion is not being incurred by the industry that's making the profits. Now, unlike China, we treat the sick here. Some. Remember my example of the person with the leg cut off last week? Getting treatment, he's got his leg cut off, he's outside the emergency room, no matter what his insurance is. Think about it. Similarly, if a person is unable to breathe, so they're coughing, they're not breathing, barely. They're about to die from emphysema because he's living next to a coal plant without scrubbers. The hospital is going to admit that patient, not let them die on the street. And now, I'm not going to use it. If healthcare continues as it's going and we are going to have a federalized system, then we are going to care about those costs and we are going to internalize those costs. So we have external costs that we as a country deal with and we internalize. And a country like China might not internalize because their spewage is going somewhere else. And they don't even care about the health of their nation. I'm just saying that, I'm not sure, but it appears like they have many, 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 many more people and plenty of people to do these jobs. No OSHA over there, okay? And I just want to raise this point for future discussion when we talk about the commons. How do we protect that shared commons over which we don't have any control? I can kind of control the U.S. commons, okay? Think about it. It's like Mexico having a different policy on oil drilling than the U.S. We both share the Gulf and all the disasters that happen there. So Mexico's just lucky that it's drifting up towards Florida and not drifting down towards Mexico. Now I'm going to continue to digress, just for fun, to definition of conservative. I'd said in some early rants that we would talk about what that is. Now it doesn't mean Republican or Libertarian, so don't listen to anything you hear on TV. Generally speaking, a capital C conservative wants a smaller government. So it's really a libertarian point of view, but it's not a libertarian, okay? Now, from a purely smaller government efficiency point of view, I'm going to bring up one item, okay, that has been completely politicized, but I'm going to give you an argument for it. Gay marriage, okay, and the legal recognition of it by all of the states. What this would do, and I'm just giving it to you from the capital C conservative point of view, it would eliminate a gigantic legal problem in the disputes that occur when one of the partners dies. In Texas, we have a concept called community property for hetero couples, which basically means, and again, I'm not giving any legal advice at all, okay? What it basically means is that a married couple can buy a house, and when one dies, and if there's no will, the spouse gets the house. No litigation. There's an easy form at the title company. For gay marriage or gay unions, there is no such efficient bypass the lawyers and lawsuits mechanism. So to me, a real conservative or capital C conservative would support gay marriage. A small c conservative, which is a Republican that calls themselves a conservative, says that God abhors these relationships and gay marriage is bad, evil. They'll use that evil word. So similarly, the cost to society in dollars of having the death penalty. So these are the two issues I'm talking about. I'm trying to define what a capital C conservative is. The cost to society in dollars of having the death penalty far outweighs the cost of putting them in jail for life. Far outweighs it. Now, a capital C conservative would oppose the death penalty due to the cost and the previously ranted inefficiencies in the capital punishment system. Just getting away from those inefficiencies on who is actually getting the death penalty. The cost. It's just ridiculous. Why are we spending this money? We don't have it, okay? And I just want to give you some items to add for future discussions. So we've added a couple of things to the definition of conservative. We've talked about privatization and how that's got the same structural deficiencies as regulations in our system of regulating, and our entrenched legislators, and the revolving door of government workers going to work for BP and Exxon, and writing the regulations. And BP writing their own regulations and EPA environmental report for the Arctic drilling well that is going forward, by the way. And I want to go ahead and thank our sponsors, pianobyangelo.com. That's Angelo Lambesis. Teaches, plays keyboards, appears Friday and Saturday nights at Russell's on Kirby Lane and Sunday mornings. Zita Design, Z-I-T-A design.com, and she's will handle all of your decorative painting and foam needs. AustinAreaPlumbing.com for all of your plumbing needs. These are Austin vendors, by the way. TicoAdventurerLodge.com, so it's T-I-C-O AdventureLodge.com, small hotel in Samara, Costa Rica. And our liquor sponsor, Amhar Tequila, which is at Santo, S-A-N-T-O, Spirits.com, an extremely smooth tequila. And I want to go ahead and apologize for giving you so much of the messages that are out there. But the privatization is something that you're hearing in messages and have heard in messages for years. And I hope that we've come up with a way of analyzing it by looking at what the people's interests are that is being privatized and relating it to the commons. So hopefully that's not too complicated and will help you out. I'll see you next Wednesday from a secure location. I may or may not be able to send emails out alerting you to